Recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Strzok. I think it would be easier, going back to the last question, if you were simply able to indicate, to your knowledge, whether the evidence would have supported the use of gross negligence, and apparently the decision made by the lawyers in the FBI was that that was not the case, and therefore that term should not be used. I just want to talk at a more macro level about what's going on here. You know, one of the things I try and do is to imagine how I would feel if various things had been done or said about a member of my own party who was president, and how I would react, because I think it's important to try and understand that. And when you take a look at the text that you sent, I think you've acknowledged that it would make people who were supporters of Trump uneasy about your intentions. And I think that was reflected in the Inspector General's report. And I think, obviously, that brought suspicion of you and the FBI among people who were Trump supporters. The fact that you also had highly critical texts of the Attorney General Eric Holder, of Governor Martin O'Malley, of Senator Bernie Sanders, I mean, isn't really relevant. They were not, to the best of my knowledge, subject to an investigation. And so, you know, it was important that the Inspector General go in and take a look to find out for us, for this committee, and for the American people what really happened. And he did. He went in, he spent a lot of time, he interviewed many people, and here was his conclusion. He did chastise you, and I understand you accept that admonishment, but found that there was no evidence whatsoever of political bias in the decisions made in that investigation. And a direct quote, we did not find documentary or testimonial evidence that improper considerations were made. Now, you know, to listen to some of my friends, you'd think that the FBI, which I had always felt was a rather made up of conservative law enforcement people, had magically been transformed into a left-wing organization. That's not my understanding. And in fact, if you take a look at the people who are in charge, I mean, you've got Mr. Wray, who was appointed by President Trump, who is not a Democrat, Mr. Comey, who was appointed by Mr. Trump, he's not a Democrat. I happen to know that Robert Mueller is not a Democrat. So these are not political decisions made by political operatives. They should be following the evidence. And I'd just like to note that if you had wanted to harm and interfere with the election of President Trump, you could have leaked information that the investigation was ongoing. But none of that came out. And as a matter of fact, we asked the leaders of the Department of Justice and FBI about whether there was an investigation of Mr. Trump prior to the election, and we were told they could not comment on it, which was, in fact, the appropriate response. You should not comment on an ongoing investigation. If you find something, you have an indictment. If you don't find something, you say nothing. That's where Mr. Comey erred. He violated that policy, and he damaged the campaign of one of the candidates, and the rest is history. So I just think that this hearing, this extraordinary hearing, I've been here a member of Congress for 24 years. It's the first time we've had this kind of event, a circus really, of trying to really investigate the investigators when that's already done. I would urge that we make sure that the actions we take do not create further divisions in our country. You know, President Trump tweeted a few months ago, quote, "The top leadership and investigators of the FBI and the Justice Department have politicized the sacred investigative process in favor of Democrats and against Republicans, something which would have been unthinkable just a short time ago. Is that tweet supported by the Inspector General's report,
No.
Mr. Strzok? No, it is not. I would hope that those of us on the committee who believe in the rule of law, who understand that our country will be damaged if we allow political divisions to attack our law enforcement agencies, to undercut investigations, that we will be harming our country in a way that our enemies, including Russia, hope we would do. That's why they interfered in our election, to cause us harm, to create division among the American people and among us here in the halls of government. So I would ask that we take yes for an answer. The Inspector General did investigate this matter. He found out there wasn't political influence, and we wait for the results of Mr. Mueller's investigation. I pray that we find that our president was not involved. That would be great news for our country. And if that's Mr. Mueller's finding, I will accept it, not investigate it. I hope that we can put our partisanship at the door, step back from the precipice that we are finding ourselves now. And I would hope that this hearing, which I think serves no good purpose for our country, could be brought to an end. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.